All right, let's talk about something most people don't want to think about, but absolutely should. Because if you're paying attention, you've probably noticed something strange happening in the world. The conflicts we see playing out in the news aren't just spontaneous eruptions of chaos. They're symptoms of deeper war, one that's already underway, even if the average person doesn't see it yet. The reality is, modern warfare doesn't start with bullets. It starts with financial warfare, cyber attacks, disinformation, psychological operations, and strategic economic moves. Before armies mobilize, before the first missile flies, there's a long, invisible battle being waged in the shadows. And if history tells us anything, we're in the thick of that phase right now. This episode is called The War Before the War, and today we're diving into the unseen battle, how nations prepare for war without firing a shot, how this plays out in real time, the warning signs and strategies already in motion, and how this affects you and what comes next, why this isn't just a geopolitical chess match, but a reality that will shape your life, your economy, and your future. And listen, before we get started, I need a favor. If you find value in these conversations, if you think more people need to be aware of what's happening beneath the surface, then do me a favor. Like, share, and review the podcast. That's how we grow. And that's how we reach more people who need to be thinking critically about the world they live in. All right, let's get into it. War doesn't start when the first bomb drops. That's just when the rest of the world finally notices. The real war, the one that's deciding the outcome before most people even realize there's a fight, happens in boardrooms, server farms, financial markets, and media networks. We're living in an era where war isn't just about tanks and missiles. It's about who controls the flow of information, who manipulates public opinion, who cripples an economy before the first shot is even fired. And guess what? That war is already happening right now. Number one, economic war. The power of the dollar and the death of trust. And before you get the boots on the ground, you attack something far more vulnerable. Trust. Trust in the currency, trust in the economy, trust in the idea that your paycheck will still buy you the same amount of food tomorrow as it did yesterday. Now, for decades, the United States has held one of the most powerful weapons in global history, the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. The ability to sanction enemies, freeze assets, control trade routes. This is what keeps America at the top. But here's the problem. Trust in the dollar is breaking. China, Russia, and the BRICS nations are making moves to ditch the dollar in favor of a competing global reserve currency. Sanctions against Russia after Ukraine forced many countries to rethink whether they want to keep their money in U.S. banks. Because if the U.S. can freeze Russia's assets overnight, what stops them from doing it to anyone else? Inflation, skyrocketing debt, and reckless monetary policy are making the dollar less appealing. Even the U.S. allies, even to U.S. allies. What happens when countries stop trading in dollars? The global balance of power shifts. Suddenly, U.S. sanctions mean a whole lot less, and the ability to control international trade diminishes. And when the economic leverage disappears, the only thing left to maintain influence is military power. This is how war begin. This is how wars begin. Number two, cyber warfare. The battles you see, let me know the battles you can't. Number two, Cyber warfare, the battles you can't see. Let me ask you something. What happens if one day you wake up and nothing works? No ATMs, no internet, no power grid. That's not science fiction. That's a cyber attack, and it's one of the first moves in modern warfare. Every major power, the US, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, they all have cyber units whose job it is to cripple an enemy before the fight even begins. And it's not just about shutting down systems, it's about erasing the truth, manipulating the public, rewriting reality in real time. In 2020, a major cyber attack breached U.S. federal agencies, exposing national security vulnerabilities. China has been systematically hacking U.S. infrastructure, stealing defense and corporate data for decades. And Russia has used cyber warfare to cripple Ukraine's power grid and disrupt elections worldwide. Cyber warfare is the modern version of an airstrike, except you don't need fighter jets or missiles, just a keyboard and the right access codes. And the best part, it's deniable. No need for a formal declaration of war when you can cripple an enemy's economy, military, or power grid with zero fingerprints. Number 3, information warfare. Controlling the narrative is controlling reality. In modern warfare, who controls the narrative controls the battlefield. It's no longer just about winning the fight. It's about making sure the world believes you're the good guy. Propaganda isn't just state-run TV anymore. It's social media algorithms. It's bot farms and AI-generated content. Narrative control is everything. If you convince the world that your enemy is evil before the war even begins, you win before the first shot is fired. Disinformation is a weapon. And if you make people question what's true and what's false, you weaken their ability to resist. China knows this. Russia knows this. And let's be real, the U.S. knows this too. This is why, before every major conflict, you see a flood of stories designed to shape public perception. The run-up to the Iraq War was full of narratives about weapons of mass destruction. Were they real, whether they're not? The war in Ukraine has been fought as much in the information space as on the battlefield. The tension with China over Taiwan is already being framed in a way that prepares the public for future conflict. It's all about getting ahead of the story, controlling the emotions of the public, and making sure the population is primed to accept whatever happens next. So what does this all mean? It means you are already in the opening stages of a global conflict. The economy is being reshaped. The digital battlefield is active. The public's mind is being prepared. This is what happens before the wars break out. Before Pearl Harbor, there was an economic sanctions and oil embargoes. Before 9/11, there were geopolitical tensions that had been building for decades. Before World War I, there was a web of alliances, propaganda, and political maneuvering. We're in that moment right now. And the only question is, what comes next? That's what we'll be talking about in the next section. How this plays out in real time. The warning signs and strategies already in motion. Tension, something feels off. It's not just political. It's just not the economy. It's the undercurrent of tension, the sense that we're standing on a fault line and the ground beneath us is shifting. We talked about economic warfare, cyber warfare, and information control, the weapons of the modern battlefield. But now let's zoom in on the real-world moves happening right now that signal we're not just heading towards conflict, we're already in it. Here's how this plays out step by step. 1. The financial chessboard. The US dollar versus BRICS nations. Wars don't start with invasions. They start with the financial world order starts breaking down. Right now, the biggest economic war in our lifetime is unfolding, and at the center of it, the future of the U.S. dollar. For decades, the petrodollar system has given the U.S. unparalleled power. Countries need dollars to buy oil, trade goods, and function in the global economy. That means America can print money, control trade sanctions, and hold economic leverage over other nations. But that dominance is being challenged hard. China, Russia, Brazil, India, and South Africa, that's the BRICS, are actively working to replace the US dollar with a new reserve currency. Saudi Arabia, the backbone of the petrodollar system, is suddenly cozying up to China, even agreeing to sell oil in yuan. Sanctions against Russia have backfired, forcing them to create alternative financial networks that are now spreading to other countries. This is massive because if the dollar loses its global dominance, the U.S. loses its ability to fund endless wars, print unlimited money, and maintain its global empire. And what does history tell us happens when a global superpower's financial dominance is challenged? They just don't let it happen. The last time an economic shift this big happened, World War II broke out. Before that, the Civil War had economic roots. Before that, the American Revolution was as much about economic independence as it was about freedom. So don't ignore this. It's not just numbers on a screen. It's the prelude to something bigger. So, number 2, military maneuvers, preparing for the next global conflict. Economics set the stage, but the military action is the exclamation point. And right now, the world is preparing for war. Look at the moves being made. United States, a $900+ billion defense budget, more than the next 10 countries combined, ramping up Pacific operations, military drills with Japan, the Philippines, and North and South Korea, building new bases near China. The U.S. is reinforcing positions in Guam and Australia. Now, China expanding its military faster than any other country on Earth. Aircraft carriers, hypersonic missiles, space-based weapons, massive war games simulating an invasion of Taiwan, strengthening alliances with Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Russia, expanding its war in Ukraine. No, this isn't just about Ukraine. It's a test case for NATO's resolve and the future of European order. Openly talking about nuclear conflict, something that hasn't been this serious since the Cold War, and they're forging closer military ties with China. Now in the Middle East, Iran is closer than ever to nuclear weapons capability. Israel and Saudi Arabia are shifting alliances in unpredictable ways. Proxy wars are intensifying in Syria, Yemen, and Lebanon. This is not business as usual. This is the world superpowers preparing for something bigger. Now, domestic destabilization, the chaos inside of our borders. Now, the final phase before making wars break out, the internal instability. You don't fight a war when your home front is weak. You'd create domestic unity first, or at least you control the chaos enough to keep your government functioning. Right now, the U.S. is more divided than ever. Elections are no longer trusted. No matter who wins, half the country thinks it was rigged. Crime is surging, cities are decaying, and social cohesion is breaking apart. Censorship is increasing. Governments are cracking down on dissenters, labeling them threats to democracy. The border is wide open. Millions of unknown individuals have entered the country. What happens when some of them are foreign agents? or sleeper cells. This isn't just random dysfunction. This is what happens before a nation enters a crisis era. Either the people in power use this chaos to consolidate control, or a new movement rises that reshapes the country entirely. And here's where the conspiracy theorists and realists start agreeing. What if the chaos is intentional? What if certain factions want the U.S. to be destabilized? What if this is a soft way to bring in a great reset, where more centralized power and control become necessary to restore order? What if all of this isn't just bad policy, but strategic groundwork for the next phase of global conflict? Sounds crazy? Maybe. But then again, so did the idea that major nations would ditch the US dollar 5 years ago. So what's next? We've laid it out. Economic warfare is in full swing. The military is moving into position. The domestic front is being manipulated and fractured. And here's the part where I tell you this doesn't mean everything is doomed. History is not destiny. The difference between collapse and renewal is who stands up, who adapts, and who sees the patterns before it's too late. So what can we do? That's what we'll talk about in the next section, how this affects you and what comes next. All right, we've covered a lot. We talked about how modern wars start before the first bullet is fired, how economic, cyber, and information warfare are already shaping the battlefield, and how superpowers are moving their pieces into place for what's coming next. Now, let's get personal. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about big geopolitical chess moves. This isn't just about presidents, generals, and billionaires playing their high-stake games of empire. This is about you. Because whether you like it or not, the war before the war will reach you. It will shape your economy, your freedoms, your security, and the world you live in. And if you want to come out of this on the right side of history, or at least, very least, not as collateral damage, you need to start thinking bigger, smarter, and more prepared. So let's talk about what's coming and how you can navigate it. First off, economic fallout. Your money is already in play, I hate to break it to you, but your bank account is already part of this war. Inflation. It's not an accident. It's a side effect of monetary warfare. Housing markets swinging wildly? That's part of economic restructuring. Global supply chains are breaking down? A strategic move in financial conflict. When nations fight over economic dominance, the regular person always gets caught in the crossfire. So what do? First, get out of debt. In times of economic chaos, debt is a weapon against you. Diversify where you store value. This means cash, hard assets, real estate, and even physical commodities. Think about the system. What happens if your bank suddenly limits your withdrawals? What happens if your financial system shifts overnight? Do you have a backup plan? Most people won't adjust until it's too late. Don't be one of them. Number 2, the war on truth. How to protect your mind from the psyops. And if you think you're not being targeted by propaganda, think again. The battlefield isn't just out there. It's in your mind. You're being conditioned to accept things you wouldn't normally accept. Censorship under the banner of safety. New policies that temporarily remove freedoms only to become permanent. manufactured division that makes neighbors hate each other instead of questioning those in power. The war before the war is about winning the minds of the public before the conflict even starts. So how do you fight back? Control your own inputs. Stopping spoon-fed narratives from corporate media. Cross-check everything. Follow multiple sources, even those you don't agree with. That to me is critical. Train your critical thinking. The ability to discern truth in an era of deception is a superpower. Never accept fear as a jurisdiction for losing freedom. And the moment you let them convince you that temporary restrictions are necessary, you've already lost. The only way to win a war of the mind is to stay mentally independent. Number 3, the reality of conflict. How safe are we really? Let's be blunt. War is coming in some form. Maybe not full-scale boots on the ground World War III, but at the very least, proxy wars, economic wars, cyber attacks, and more aggressive global positioning. And when that happens, it won't just be something you watch on the news. So let's talk about real world risks and how to prepare. Cyber attacks and infrastructure disruptions, we've already seen it happen. The Colonial Pipeline hack shut down fuel supplies on the East Coast. Cyber attacks have breached hospitals, banks, and even government agencies. Imagine what happens when a large-scale attack hits water supplies, or power grids, or financial institutions. Do you have an emergency plan if the grid goes down? Do you have cash on hand if ATMs and digital banking stops working? Can you function without the internet for a week or a month? You don't need to be paranoid. You just need to be prepared for the world that isn't as stable as you thought. Geopolitical tensions and civil unrest. Now, here's the reality. Every major war in history has had ripple effects on civilian populations. Even if the U.S. isn't directly invaded, there will be effects. Supply chain disruptions, which we've already seen with other things. Imagine shortages of food, gas, medicine, not because of local issues, but because global logistics got wrecked. Mass migration events, wars in other countries push waves of displaced people into new regions. Government crackdowns in response to instability. War allows governments to justify extreme measures, martial law, emergency powers, control over resources. Are you ready for these possibilities? Because history shows they're not hypothetical. What's your role in the future? Look, I'm not trying to tell you this to make you paranoid. I'm telling you because knowledge is power, bottom line. Most people, they won't see it coming. They'll go about their lives assuming everything will work out until it doesn't. But history belongs to those who see the storm and prepare for it. So what's your role in the next era? Be adaptable. The world, is changing and changing fast. Be ready to pivot. Strengthen your local network. In crises, communities survive better than individuals. It's the fallacy of the lone wolf. Develop real skills. Can you fix things? Can you grow food? Defend yourself. Can you even defend yourself? If not, it's time to go learn. Stay mentally strong. The biggest war of all. The one for your mindset. The fourth turning, the great cycle of crisis and rebirth, isn't something happening to us. It's something we have the power to shape. The question is, will you be ready? folks, we covered a lot today. We broke down how modern warfare starts long before the first missile flies, through economic manipulation, cyber attacks, the information control. We looked at the real-world warning signs already playing out, for the collapse of the U.S. dollar dominance to military movements across the world and the destabilization happening inside our own borders. And most importantly, we talked about how this isn't just some geopolitical chess match happening in faraway places. It's a reality that will impact your life. But here's the thing. Fear doesn't win wars. Preparedness does. So right now we're at a crossroads. You're at a crossroads. You can either be one of the people sleepwalking into whatever comes next, hoping someone else will figure it out, or you can start thinking, planning, and preparing for the future in a way that puts you in control. Because history belongs to those who see the storm and get ready for it. So ask yourself, are you financially resilient enough to handle economic instability? Are you mentally strong enough to navigate a world of propaganda and psychological warfare? Are you physically prepared for a future that might require real-world skills, not just theories? Are you building a community around you, or are you trying to go it alone? Because the next chapter of history is being written right now. And the people who understand that, the people who refuse to be blindsided, will be the ones shaping what comes next. My final ask, help spread the word. And if this episode made you think, if you got something out of this, do me a favor, like, share, and review the podcast. That's how this thing grows. That's how we reach more people who need to be thinking critically about the future. Because this isn't about doomsday fear-mongering. This is about seeing the world for what it is and taking control of your place in it. I appreciate you. Stay sharp, stay ready, and I'll see you next time.